Good evening, class. This week we are looking at understanding mental health. And we know that when we look at our different components of health, we're looking at spiritual health, we're looking at wellness as a definition. But now we're going to look at mental health. And what are some of those components that deal with that mental health and different mental health issues, especially things that affect you as students? 9 times out of 10, not even as students, but even outside of class, you have a regular life. And so most of everything that we deal with has some component of stress that is involved in it. And so today we're going to, focus a little bit on, what are those components of that mental health? What are some schisms, of that mental health? And what do we do to care for ourselves, to make sure that we stay in optimum health, but as well as take care of some of those mental uh, capacities. Normally, you would always hear people say, I need to take a mental vacation. I need a mental health day. Those are some serious things because sometimes we just don't realize how much our brains need to rest. To understand how important it is to have an avenue where one can adequately recharge their mental batteries. Just as much as we recharge our physical batteries, our spiritual batteries, those mental batteries also have to be recharged. Think about it when you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning and you feel like you haven't slept because your brain has been racing all night. Uh, that's when you'll need a mental break. And so, as we look at mental health from a health and wellness standpoint, we look at understanding and caring for your mind, and more importantly, as you care for your mind, you care for your body. And so, a lot of the questions and answers that you might have when you look at mental health becomes quite an interesting issue because we're looking at more than just understanding health, but we're looking at it from a standpoint of how do people that are mentally healthy value themselves and care for themselves versus those who may not be as mentally balanced and stable. How do you carry out those responsibilities from day to day? How do you understand and manage your priorities? How do you establish priorities, your social connections? All of these things. And so look at it as this circle where you have your relationships, responsibility. How do you value yourself, your self esteem, your work habits? Do you understand your own limitations and possibilities? Are you living a fulfilling life? And more importantly, and most importantly, how do you perceive reality? A lot of times you'll hear people speak and you'll say, I don't know what plane of reality that they're on, especially when we're all looking at a similar picture or we're looking at a similar topic. We often wonder. With our kids, we often wonder about, mental health issues. And when we look at kids that have ADHD or some type of anxiety disorder, we look at mental health when we look at people who uh, commit suicide and have these different types of ailments. But most importantly, we look at some of these breaks and we wonder how these psychotic or mental breaks affect individuals. Well, the first thing I might ask you is then how was your mood? Do you know people that are always in happy moods, they're in sad moods, they're in between moods, or they're just in moods that you can interpret, where they are in a one time in a happy mood, the second time in a grumpy mood, and you really can't get a read on them. Well, a lot of that deals with stress. How do you handle it? Self-esteem, and then just what type of personality do you have? Now, there are different types of personalities. You got A type, B type, C type, and D type. So, what kind of person, are you? What type of characteristics do you have that looks at the different types of individuals that you can be. Well, uh, let's ask this question then. You have type A people. Type A people are very aggressive, very impatient. You have type B people, which are much more relaxed. You have type C people who are hardworking, highly responsible. They're very courteous. They're not very negative. They're not very much people who enjoy conflict. You have type D people that they are very negative and they don't have very good social connections because of that negativity. And so a lot of this is dealing with your perception and how do you perceive yourself and others inside of the sphere in which we call the earth, inside of this box that we call society, among the pieces that we call people. How do we exercise this brain power, this pia matter? And so the question I would have for you is, what percentage of the time do you feel yourself in, that happy place or that sad place or that angry place? That is what really connects you from a mind-body type of experience. So as college students, we often wonder about, how are you going to relate? Being away from home, eating cat food, experiencing relationships, losing relationships, not knowing how you're going to do in class. It becomes very stressful. And so even as you sit through this class, at some point, it's going to feel stressful because you're going to feel the weight of having to do different activities, different assignments, having exams. And some people, they get lost in the rigor, of college life. And 9 times out of 10, they just feel very hopeless. And so even in our day-to-day lives, we sometimes feel that bouts of depression. And that differs between males and females. We may have triggers, to that event, which leads to that disorder. But when you look at the state of, going through school and looking at these things and being worried and having anxiety, there's nothing wrong with that. Those are part of our emotional, components that make us. But do we allow it to consume us? And so when we look at those things, we discover that it leads to a lot of different triggers. One thing is, how often do you expose yourself, to situations that could cause, different types of negativity? And once again, a lot of these things lead to that type of depression, the desperation, the loss of interest, eating, having trouble sleeping. Do you feel like you don't have enough energy? Do you feel like sometimes you can't think? A lot of these things play a role in that disorder. And you might know people who are bipolar, the manic depression, where they're having mood swings or very rapid changes in thinking and behavior, different changes in their physical patterns. These are some different things. In some ways, we almost become out of touch, out of sync with ourselves, with reality inside of our social networks. And this is not a very uncommon phenomenon. There are at least 2 million people, in the United States that suffer from some form of bipolar disorder. But then we also look at people who have phobias. Do you have, claustrophobia? Are you afraid of heights? Are you afraid of dogs? Are you afraid of people? Are you afraid of different types of insects? So a lot of that is also a mental break based out of fear, when they see certain things. Now, for example, when I was younger, I got stuck in an elevator. And so now for me, I am very afraid of elevators. I've walked 17, 18 stories of stairs because I did not want to ride the elevator. That's one of my phobias, one of my fears. But I still ride elevators. I just kind of look up and stand in the corner. That is, that's my personal fear that I have to overcome. Now, some of those things can lead to what? Panic attacks, some types of panic disorder, where you become so apprehensive that you can't function. Those are the people that are so anxious and possess so much anxiety that they can't even go outside of their houses or really interact with people because of that severe disorder. And so, we talked about ADHD earlier. Hyperactivity, that attention deficit disorder. Where this is where the kids, we sometimes think that, hey, you can't sit straight, you can't do things, or you might be very, OCD. You might have, irrational thoughts and behaviors or things that they always go in certain places. And so we often find this in our younger people that steer them to become more not social outgoing, but to go into more social caves because they don't know how to deal with this situation, which then leads to different bouts of depression and anxiety and other different types of mental schisms. Then you have people who are schizophrenic, and people that are schizophrenic, we think that that's their alter egos coming out, where they have a different sense of reality. It reminds me of that movie, boy, it slips my mind, but it was the movie where the guy had like 20 different personalities, and different ones would come out at different times. And, and that is sometimes what people see. Almost like that movie where there were 9 different people inside of this one person that had all these different identities. Identity, was the name of that movie, where you see these delusions and not really being logical in their thoughts, but that was because they thought that there were other people controlling them, and they have that lack of control over it, or they feel like there's not a lot of hope, and they stop and they say, oh my gosh, I don't know what it is. But it leads to different movements, different realities, a warped sense of reality, a warped sense of social interaction, a warped sense of position. And then for some, that end result of mental disorders leads to suicide, where the healthy person who feels they have everything to live for suddenly becomes, I don't have anything to live for. That severe form of depression, that severe break in mental and personality trait. It may be because you have alcohol problems, drug problems, other types of substance abuse issues, being, anorexic, being bulimic. You have all of these different feelings that go into that cause and factors for suicide. But 3 of them that really fit, or there's a number of them but one is mental disorder. The other one we were just talking about, substance abuse. The other one is that sense of loneliness and hopelessness, stress, a physical ailment, a brain chemistry problem, or even a family history and family makeup problem. For most, it's because they don't think they have somewhere to turn, that no one understands them, that no one takes the time to listen to them, and they feel as if all hope is gone. So they have nowhere to turn to deal with it. And so a lot of this from a health and wellness standpoint, comes with, being able to express yourself, being able to realize that things and events and accomplishments happen one step at a time. Spend time doing things that you like. Looking at what do you want to experience? Do you have a bucket list? Do you separate who you are from what you know that you are not? And, the exercise, the volunteering, but also the most important thing is, not having that self-pity party, feeling down on yourself all the time. And for a lot of people, we give them all different types of names. Your Debbie Downers, your doubting Nancy's, all of those people that always look at the negative side of the coin. And they look at that negative side of the coin as playing quote unquote devil's advocate or trying to be a voice of reason. No, for some, they're just negative people. And so when they try to tell you what they're not, it usually means that deep down inside it is something that they are. And it makes you ponder. It makes you think. How important is, that mental health, to you? And so these are a lot of these issues that we look at from a mental health component. Looking at, the definition of that psychological health for enduring different things, happiness and mastering something, or, for most, they look at their life through different prisms. But from a critical thinking standpoint, I want you to self-reflect and think about what are some things that you do. How do you view your life? What do you think people say about what you are doing? But most importantly, how do you perceive your place in this world? What are those indicators that are positive or negative to what you think? If it's positive, how can you keep it going? If it's negative, what do you have to do to change? Is it cutting someone loose? Is it doing more things for yourself? Is it understanding that where you are, you have to change your own behavior? But these are all of those questions that play a role when we look at mental health and mental stability. From your childhood, through your adolescence, through your young adult life, through your college life, to your adult life, as you age, as you get older. All of these mental health components, they evolve with us. They grow with us. But at the same time, it is up to us to understand where we are in this process. And not just understand where we are, but understand how we got there. Why are we here? And what do we do to ensure not that we're happy all the time, pie in the sky type of mentality, but that we are grounded in this reality, that we are grounded in this world in which we live, and how do we find ways to live among it, knowing what we know with our good points and bad points, with our pluses, with our minuses, with our salient personalities and behaviors and traits, versus those that may be a little bit unpleasing. But at the end of the day, that is that mental component. It's not an easy picture. It's like looking at a piece of art. For a lot of people, mental health is in the eye and the experience of the beholder. And so we look at all of these different situations, we try to apply them to a health and wellness type of component, and then we step back. We step back to see what is this reality in which we live, and how does our mental state either helps uplift it, support it, help us to be able to persevere through it, or is it an anchor which causes us to sink into seas of demise and despair, into pits of abyss, those abysses of depression and anxiety and phobia? What is it that drives us to those different levels? And so that is the message and the thought that I leave for you this week. That as you continue to read up and study on mental health and these disorders, what do we do? What do you do to ensure that you give your brain the proper exercise and the proper rest that it needs? Well, that's all for this week. Thank you for listening to this message. Please don't forget, if you have any questions, to get in touch with me. I look forward to talking with you all, and see you on the next video.